Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's masterclass on smart contracts by Nikhil. Now, I can try and condense what I've read over Wikipedia for the last couple of days and give an introduction, but I think that would be quite inappropriate, especially when Nikhil is around. So, I will not really take time trying to give a long introduction, which is already available online. I'll hand over to Nikhil, who will take you through the session first. And after that, probably Nikhil will take 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions. If any of the attendees have a question to ask, just put that down in the chat box. I'll pick it up from there and then read it out to Nikhil. Yeah, over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mahesh. I hope I'm audible. I can see my screen as well. So thanks a lot for Daksha for inviting me for this masterclass, and special thanks to Mahesh and Chitra for all the brainstorming that we've done before the session. So just to give you, just to sort of set the context of today's webinar and what we are going to do today, right? So what we are going to do is look at the concept of smart contracts and see how that applies in terms of specifically dispute resolution. So when I use the word dispute resolution, I think that's a loaded term in the sense. So we're not looking at litigation. We're not looking at essentially creating a pathway for going to court, but we are looking at the contractual disputes that arise between the parties and how smart contracts can actually come in and play a role in ensuring that the disputes are resolved. So the focus here is going to be on resolution. Rather than the idea of justice, so to speak, or dragging this conversation to a court or any other related things that come to my mind. I know that in India, when we talk about dispute resolution, the first thing that comes to our mind is actually litigation. But of course, we need to keep in mind that there are alternate modes of dispute resolution, and my focus will largely be on that. In fact, my focus in the sense I'm probably just going to spend a slide on it, and then I'll hand it over to the experts in dispute resolution, that's Mahesh and Chitra, to weigh in as well. So let's quickly start moving on to smart contracts per se. So as a very brief intro, so let's look at contracts, right? I mean, what are contracts? So contracts are essentially nothing but there is an agreement between the parties to do something, and how the relationship between the parties are determined, and the parties are coming forward to sort of record it. So if you look at the nature of the contracts, so say the contracts are everywhere. It's everywhere in the sense that it's a integral part of our daily life. So when you go on to browse a website, I think, let's just take a step back. A couple of minutes back, I got asked by Zoom, right, that this video is being recorded by Sai University, so that it can be used for other purposes, etc. And I've consented to that and come on board. So that itself is a contract to start with. And when you get onto a bus, when you buy a flight ticket, when you travel through railways, when you are buying an item from Amazon or a Flipkart, we are entering into contracts on a regular basis, and it's an integral part of our daily life itself, the contracts. Then, of course, you have the oral contracts that we offered, and there is often an offer and acceptance, whether you're going to a shop and buying an item, whether it's online or in real life, or life is fully governed by contracts, and contracts play a very important role in moving the economy, in ensuring that we move forward in your life. We each and every day we enter into multiple number of contracts throughout our life. With the digital age, what has happened is the sheer number and the volume of the contracts that we interact with has gone up significantly. For instance, let's say you go to Amazon and buy an item. There is a contract that you have signed up with Amazon with respect to the data that Amazon collects, or let's say any of the warranty items. There is a seller which is on Amazon who's telling you that, look, this is a warranty that I'm extending to a particular product. So there are several aspects relating to contract that we often interact with on a daily basis. But the pure form of contract per se, if you look at it, which is, there should be an offer. A party is offering to do something, and if we accept the offer, then the contract is concluded, and that contract conclusion can be by way of an oral contract. It can be also by a standard form of contract, like in the case of a transport service or a logistics provider, etc., etc. But it's everywhere. So then I'm going to talk about what really are smart contracts, and I'm going to also show you something which is a very primitive form of smart contract which exists in the world right now. So which is a simple thing called coded offer and acceptance, right? An offer and acceptance can be coded and kept, whether it's in the form of a computer or it's whether in the form of a machine. And the simple example that comes to my mind is a vending machine, right? So if you just go to a mall, or if you go to a hospital or wherever, there is an offer that this machine is placing. It's giving you the offer. Look, I'll sell you sneakers, or I'll sell you lace, and the price of the lace or sneakers is X. Then you just pay the money. You insert the money into the vending machine, and the vending machine accepts it. If it's a correct note, then it gives you the product. That's a fairly simple way in which an offer and an acceptance can be coded, and that's been in our life for quite some time. But are smart contracts just this? I mean, the answer is actually no. I mean, this is a very primitive form of what's known as smart contract, and smart contracts are much more than that. It does a lot of function. So if you look at it currently, the way in which offer and acceptance happens on a vending machine is that I can pay money and get a lace packet in return. But let's say that I have a problem with the lace packet. Let's assume that it was a package which came out was actually open, and I had a problem with that, right? In such a situation, how do I handle the disputes? I'll probably have to contact the owner of the vending machine. I'll probably have to contact Lace itself. I don't know. I mean, there could be endless possibilities for us to resolve a dispute which comes out of a relationship, out of just with a vending machine. But what smart contracts does is actually takes the whole aspect of it, which is not just the offer and acceptance part, but also the performance of the contract part also can be to a large extent automated, and that can be executed, performed in by using computer technology in an automated manner. So when you think about it, just keep in mind the use of the word automated manner, because we'll come to that specific point a bit later during our discussion today. One of the reasons why smart contracts really came up in the horizon recently was because of blockchain, because the opportunity that blockchain offers in terms of coming out with a distributed ledger mechanism where each participant in the blockchain ecosystem could have their own distributed ledgers, keeping in store of various aspects relating to the contract, records being created, it being created in a manner which is difficult to actually tamper with or difficult to actually manipulate in that sense, is why smart contracts has come into fore. And smart contracts are fairly common in the blockchain ecosystem as well. So if you are familiar with Ethereum platform, you could use some of these aspects relating to the contract could be coded into Ethereum platform or any other platform so that it does certain functions. And blockchain is something which has helped the cost of smart contract quite a lot. So the way it works typically is that the terms of a contract can be smartly coded into a particular format, right? So for instance, it works on the basis of a if-then format, right? So I'm sure you're familiar with in IoT, you're familiar with what's known as the IFFT, which is a very popular app when it comes to automation. So the simple rule is, look, I have set my computer to a simple rule. After 7 p.m., there is a particular software which determines the actual brightness of a screen. It's adjusted, and the warmth of a screen is adjusted so that I could get a better sleep at night. That's a simple if-then format. So if it strikes 6 o'clock, then the screen's temperature changes to a much more warmer temperature so that I can avoid blue light, so that I can sleep better at night. That's a very simple one. Similarly, you could have several levels of automation possible using if-then format. Like for instance, if I step into the house and get into my Wi-Fi network, then an alarm comes onto my phone which says that, look, did you remember to collect the car keys from the car, or did you take the purse from the car? So I could automate so many things like that by way of smart if-then formats, which is a very pure logic by which codes are written. So you can have various eventualities being coded into a particular code, and we can talk about an example in the next slide. The other reason, the other aspect to remember in smart contracts is that, look, when smart contracts are coded, right, there may be a need to reach out to a database or some sort of a registry outside to figure out if a particular event has happened. So for that, what it uses is that it uses oracles. An oracle could be a software oracle could be a hardware oracle. We will look at some of the examples of oracles for that matter. So one is a simple one is a clock, right? So it says that, look, 6 a.m. in the morning, a particular thing needs to happen. Let's look at it in the context of a contract. So let's assume that I have an agreement with a person where I say that, look, you will pay me 1 lakh rupees by end of a particular day, right? So one of the oracles could be the fact that 6 p.m. on a centralized clock server, which actually intimates a particular smart contract ecosystem, the fact that, look, 6 p.m. has happened, the evening has happened, the clock has struck still. It could be also linked to a bank account. Let's assume that you were supposed to pay me some money by 6 p.m., right? Bank account could be giving an instruction to the smart contract saying that, look, the money payment has happened or it hasn't happened, right? That could be a particular trigger for a contract. For instance, let's say that my agreement with you is that, look, by 6 p.m. you need to pay the money. If I pay you the money, then I will actually send you a non-fungible token which has the intellectual property of a particular song or a movie that I created. If the money goes into my bank account, then that can be immediately automated without me taking an additional step in actually sending that IP. Because in typical contracts, what happens is that when we write and create contracts as lawyers, we not only need to build mechanisms or build language around how the contract will function, it also relating to how the contract will be performed and how the parties can be trusted with respect to performing their part of the contract itself. So a lot of the trust aspect relating to the contract, the very fact that by 6 p.m., if you pay me the money, the property will automatically transfer to you without me playing a role there. So typically in contractual disputes, what happens is that you probably get the money by 6 p.m., but then you decide that, look, I probably may be getting around 2 lakhs right now. Somebody else may be giving 2 lakhs, so I won't transfer the IPR to a particular song or a movie that I created. I could take that call. But smart contracts will eliminate that level of discretion and in fact will build more trust into the ecosystem, where if the money has actually hit my account, then immediately you will get the IP in a particular song or a movie that we are talking about. Similarly, another one which will work as an oracle is ledgers, for that matter. So if you have any sort of ledgers which record a particular transaction, for instance, entry of let's assume that we are looking at a situation where I have an agreement with someone that some sort of a employee who used to come to my house on 20 days minimal a month, and you have the ability to look at a ledger to see his attendance per se. It could be an automated attendance mechanism. It could be, if you are familiar with apps such as Apna Complex and MyGate, which are being used by societies to manage their ingress, egress into the society, that could act as a ledger or a register, which records the fact that, look, a person has come to job for 20 days. So this is the amount that needs to be paid. And there is a smart contract trigger, which happens to my bank account, and the money goes directly from the bank account to the other person's bank account without any need for me to apply my mind. There is much more trust in the system. There is much more trust both for the employer and the employee. The other one could be sensors. Sensors, in the classical sense, I think it's essentially devices which are able to sense a particular aspect, whether it's relating to light or whether it's relating to any data collected, etc., etc. And one of the smart uses of sensors that we can see with respect to smart contracts is actually in case of logistics. For instance, when goods are moving from one city to the other, it's possible to figure out where, at which point, what that good is. And depending on that, you could have milestone-based payment mechanisms to ensure that a payment actually moves. So let's say that I'm transporting a good I'm right now in Thiruvananthapuram to Bangalore. By the time it reaches Bangalore, the payment can happen from my account to the other party because the contract is actually fulfilled. There is no need for him to give me a call and say that, hey, I transported the good already, and you need to now pay me, because it's fully automated. Like I said, there is much more trust. Similarly, you could look at death certificates, inheritance certificates for wills or inheritance matters, etc., etc., where upon death of a particular person, this could happen. So one of the things that I've always thought about is actually my digital afterlife. I mean, what happens after my time in this world is over? So I have accumulated so much of assets which are digital assets, which could be passwords, which could be linked to my bank accounts. So once I pass away, when that happens, if let's say we automate a system where my children could upload the inheritance certificate to a particular vault, that they will get the possession of that particular digital assets that I have, the passwords I have. So these are the things that which could be automated and created. Similarly, another example is land registry. We could automate a lot of real estate transactions using land registry as well, using smart contracts. So this is like a small smart contract lifecycle. The way it works is essentially between two parties. So the reference is between Alice and Bob. I should have made it to maybe Ayyappan and Babita. But regardless, just it's Alice and Bob, and so on a distributed ledger. The parties agree into a contract and say that, look, we agree to do certain things, and it's connected with the banks. It's connected with oracles, which will actually wait for the trigger to happen. And once the trigger happens, the contract is executed automatically. And the contract can also perform certain functions relating to, let's say that there is compliance reporting out of a contract. There needs to be statements given out of a contract. All these processes could be automated and built in so that we also do not waste time in going after these aspects. And a lot of operational parts of the contract are taken care of just because of the fact that there is a smart contract taking care of these aspects. So one simple example that I wanted to draw out is with respect to rent agreement. In fact, I rented out an apartment very recently, and that's one of the reasons why I specifically mentioned it. So let's say that an owner is entering into an agreement with the tenant, and there is a rent and security deposit, and the security deposit is kept in some sort of a bank, which is an escrow, or it's kept as some sort of a deposit with them, and the tenant needs to pay, let's assume rent and security deposit. He also need to pay some money to the society as maintenance fees. And let's assume that he doesn't pay. What happens is that the owner should have the ability to actually deduct the money from security deposit at his will. But that whole process can be automated. So let's assume that there is an oracle, which is an Appla complex or a MyGate app, which records whether a tenant is paid a rent or not. Data can move from there to the owner and say that, look, he has paid the rent, so there's nothing that needs to be done. But there could be an instance where the tenant does not pay the maintenance fee, in which case an automatic deduction from the security deposit happens. So the actual money eligible to be returned to the tenant at the end of the rent period will actually be reduced by that number. And there is always a transaction record of that of this happening created so that in future there is no dispute between the parties as well. And let's assume that if that deduction is actually unfair or that deduction is disputable, then there will be a mechanism under the contract itself to automatically move that to a forum of choice, which could be a state-appointed tribunal or it could be an arbitration tribunal, which will sit and then decide the dispute between the owner and the tenant. So several uses where smart contracts are used. Any sort of decentralized applications can work on the basis of smart contracts. One of my favorites is actually the royalty for the IPR. So one of the most complex aspects relating to royalty calculation is when it comes to online streaming of music, right? So when your music, because it's not just one party who's got the right to music, several artists have got right to music. There is copyright in lyrics, there is copyright in the underlying sound recording, the musical work which is involved, the producer of a particular movie if it relates to a soundtrack from a movie, etc., etc., etc. So the whole aspect can be coded into a smart contract. Let's assume that a company like an Apple Music is playing a particular song. Every time that song is being played, there could be a hit against the register which says that, look, X amount of money should automatically go to the lyricist, Y amount of money should go to the person who composed the music, performance rights with respect to a singer or any other person who played some instruments there will automatically debit it from a particular account and will move from one account to the other in a smart manner. which will also, and all records of this will be kept so that it can be audited later for any sort of compliance or issues with respect to adjustments and reconciliation. Similarly, logistic example we already spoke of. Insurance is another example. So let's assume that you are insuring a particular building, and there is Oracle, which is actually a CCTV camera, which is recording the condition of the building. And let's assume that there is a fire. The immediate trigger happens from there without the actual need for physical inspection or various other aspects relating to the whole insurance procedure itself. ICOs, or the initial coin offerings, is another one which is fairly automated. Very similar to that is the next two, which is trade financing and supply financing. So trade financing and supply financing essentially, supply chain financing essentially involves using some sort of models for invoice discounting, or using invoices which are already raised, or orders or supplies which are already based, and then providing working capital for that, right? So it really depends upon looking at the invoices and see if that invoice is actually legit. And if the invoice is actually legit, then the money can be given to that person. And once that payment happens, then there could be an escrow account from which the automatic money could get deducted. Similarly, NFTs we spoke of, IoTs we already spoke of, Internet of Things and the use of sensors there. E-commerce and mobility are the other two aspects where we can implement smart contracts as well. To that extent, I think to a large extent, e-commerce and mobility, so to some extent, if you look at it, if you use any of these platforms, like for instance, an Uber or an Ola, a large part of it is automated. It's just that there's a lot more intermediation played by an intermediary, or a lot of intermediation played by a platform, where a lot of discretion is actually given to the platform which is sitting on top, which could be a Uber or Ola, who is actually determining how the rules of the game with respect to that whole ecosystem is. Whereas if you could actually code a lot of aspects into it, it will actually build a lot of trust, and it will actually take away from a lot of other aspects relating to such platforms, which are network effects and other associated impact it has on the whole economy itself. Running very quickly through the advantages of disadvantage. So one is the aspect that the possibility to standardize. For instance, when you look at, you could create a smart contract for rental agreements of an apartment, right? Or it could be a different version for a house, right? It could be different for a furnished apartment. It could be different for an unfurnished apartment. So you could create different smart contracts, and that could be adopted as a standard pretty much throughout the country, and can be used to implement. And if there are innovations or additions to be required to any of these smart contracts per se, that itself can be added to the smart contract, and that's a great advantage of smart contracts. Of course, the second aspect is the speed, right? So you have, let's say that a state or an institution comes behind and say that, look, this is the way in which we are going to do real estate transactions in the country, and this is our standardized format in which we are building trust. Let's assume the Builders Association in Karnataka comes up and say that, look, this is how we will transact with respect to our real estate buyers. If somebody, so as you know, delays are a huge problem when it comes to contract, right? So when it comes to real estate contracts specifically. So to my mind, I have never seen anyone being given possession of an apartment or a house on time by a real estate player. There are always, penalty clauses involved there, but unfortunately, they're not enforced because of the fact that, look, you needed to go to court earlier or a consumer forum earlier, and right now you have the RERA, but you know how much time it takes actually to actually make something enforceable. Even if you get a RERA order, it needs to be enforced further. But let's say that at the time of buying an apartment, we agree that, look, a particular amount that the buyer is paying will be kept in a escrow form, and if there is a delay in delivering the possession certificate, and that automation or an oracle could be the fact that by, let's assume, 15th of September, the builder should upload the possession certificate onto the server. And if it doesn't, there is an automatic deduction of a penalty which goes from this particular account to the buyer's account, which actually takes away a lot of problems with respect to dispute resolution, because you don't even, so you're essentially preempting the possibility of a dispute itself, right? So we are not waiting for the builder to say that, look, I could not complete the flat because of X, Y, Z reasons, but it's automated in a manner so the buyer can actually trust the builder more when it comes to buying their apartment, knowing fully well that some part of the money will be kept in an escrow, and it will be released to the buyer if the builder fails to fulfill a part of the contract. The other aspect is the security, the secure aspect of the very nature of smart contracts itself, and the reduced transaction cost, which could be transaction costs could be reduced to a significant extent if you could automate a large part of it. You don't need to redo this contract every time. It's only at times when you are making some sort of a non-standard form of contract, or when you customize a particular contract, is only then you need to spend some time in writing up the contract. The other aspect, of course, is certainty, which is again related to trust. Then there is a lot of possibility for business innovation here because of the fact that your overall speed of doing business is significantly higher. And this is when I'm also talking about full automation, which is possible by smart contracts. The last point is actually the need for minimization of the need for trusted intermediaries. This we spoke of earlier. The problem with intermediaries often is that intermediation is a reality in the world of technology or the world in the commercial world for that matter. There are intermediaries who sit on top. They're essentially platforms. But if you code a lot of aspects relating to how do we handle disputes, or how do we handle even the minute aspects relating to the transaction, a lot of need for intermediation is actually taken away. And we can move from a platform-based model to a protocol-based model if we do that, because we are coding how to deal with disputes, how to deal with the performance into the finer and minute details. And over time, what we will see is we can even do away with intermediaries to a large extent. That intermediary could be government, that could be a government-appointed corporation or a government structure. It could be a private party as well. But nevertheless, intermediaries' problem is that they assume so much power. They gather so much power because of the fact that they actually intermediate a large number of transactions. Now, moving on to the disadvantages. One is the unclear legal status, because we'll come to it a bit because I'm also going into the specifics with respect to India in another slide. Financial issues is another one because of the fact that, look, of the cost involved in doing it. There are operational risks, and there are we can only automate for things which can be into the format of if-then, right? So there could be aspects relating to discretion, which we'll come to a bit later. There are, of course, technical and cybersecurity risks, and lack of discretion probably is one of the major points that we need to keep in mind. So this is something that will come again in some of the other slides, but the fact of the matter is, look, not all contracts are worded as should, right? There are several clauses which are worded as may, right? And also there are several instances where parties use their discretion when it comes to a contract. A classic example that I can think of is, commercial relationships in outsourcing, where we have SLAs. We have, which says that, look, an outsourcing agreement will say the service provider will attain 99% of uptime. And if the 99% uptime is not maintained, the server will calculate and send the result to a smart contract. And then a penalty will be automatically levied. But fact of the matter that we need to understand is these penalties are not necessarily there in the contract for the customer company to make money out of, right? They're not in the business of making money out of something that they're outsourcing. The reason why it exists is that the reason why SLAs exist is because of the fact that, look, they want to give better service to their end customers, right? So in that sense, most of the time, companies do not enforce these SLAs because of the fact that they would like to pressurize the service provider to actually do a better job next time, rather than just make some money out of it. So it's mostly used as some sort of a stick, which is not really enforced. And the problem with the smart contracts is that, look, it takes away this discretion, and that's actually the beauty of contracts itself. It gives the parties a lot of discretion. So, for instance, I spoke of an instance with respect to me giving out a flat on rent. After the first month, I had deferred my security deposits to my tenant, saying that, look, they can pay me the security deposit for 3 months over a period of 2 months. And after 2 months, they called and said, look, I was expecting another person to join me, but that need not happen. But you come and look at the way in which I have maintained the house. I have maintained it beautifully, right? So please use your discretion and let me continue to occupy the flat. I have already paid you 2 months security deposit. So don't insist on getting that from me. And look, I I went and saw the flat, and I was quite happy with the way they were keeping the flat, and I decided that look, I'll waive off the amount for the next month. That sort of opportunity in smart contracts is often there, not there. The way we understand smart contracts, and that's a problem that we need to solve for. The other aspect is the upfront cost of digitization, because of the fact that look, um, uh, ultimately when we are looking at moving large amounts of transactions online or to a smart contract format, you need a lot of automation. For instance, let's look at digitization. For instance, if you look at something like the land register should be digitalized, the title should be digitalized. So there is an upfront cost involved in actually implementing this and even coming up with a standard. But I believe that it's an upfront cost. It will definitely work in our favor and will pay returns if we are ready to invest in the smart contract infrastructure. The other one, of course, is the sensitization cost involved in it, because there is not need to be a lot of effort involved in sensitizing the public about the need for smart contracts. Few issues that I'd like to touch upon here. So one is the aspect that look, not all contracts under the Information Technology Act that we have can be digital, right? So you cannot execute things like a power of attorney, real estate transactions, or wills for that matter, etc. cannot be executed using the digital way. You need the wet signature. You need to go and register these documents. You need to stamp these documents. E-stamping in India is a very difficult process. It's not fully automated or enabled. Similarly, you cannot touch these contracts. And for instance, if we cannot really do use smart contracts in real estate transactions, we are actually losing a huge opportunity, because there is a serious lack of trust in the real estate market due to several reasons. I mean, one could blame the market, one could blame the builders, one could blame the demonetization, GST, you name it. There is a serious lack of trust in the market, and there have been several insolvencies in the market, which has sort of affected the trust in the market as well. So a smart contract can be used to build that trust and regain that trust in the real estate space. And it's a huge opportunity that we're missing out, because of the fact that our current Information Technology Act do not allow for such transactions. And also the Registration Act and the stamp duty, the various stamp acts and various places just make it extremely complicated to implement. The other aspect is the digital signature issue. So as you know, under the Information Technology Act, there are two kinds of digital signatures which has the same validity as that of a wet signature. So you cannot use technologies such as DocuSign and various other technologies available in the market and say that look, that's equivalent to a wet signature, because of the fact that the law doesn't recognize those signatures or do not consider them equivalent to a wet signature. So if you go and sign a contract, it's considered valid. But if you use an electronic means to sign that, you need an Aadhaar-enabled digital signature to be issued, or a USB token use digital signature to actually sign a contract. It's not that if you do an electronic contract, it's not invalid. But if, let's say that there is a question of enforceability, and if someone challenges the very fact that they signed the contract, the burden of proof will be actually on the other party, rather than the person who claims that they have not signed the contract. So I think that's where the complication is, which needs to be, of course, addressed by the government to enable more smart contracts. The last one, again, I spoke of is the lack of discretion. So I think lack of discretion, to my mind, is a major problem, because fact of the matter is commercial relationships are not set in stone. They are evolving relationships. They are relationships which are based on trust and human trust, right? So I decided to waive off my security deposit for my tenant because of the fact that I trust that person. I need not trust another person, so in which I need the smart contract to help me. But if I trust that person, I should be given the option to actually deviate from what I've written in the stone and give them an exception, give them a waiver, give them an extended date for compliance, right? So that's where I think a lot of discretion is often lacking in the way smart contracts is typically understood. So what I propose, or what I believe in, is that we should look at a hybrid model where we look at may versus should in two different lines. So if there is a contractual clause which says that, look, if the tenant hasn't paid the money, the landlord should debit the money from the security deposit. It's an automatic action. But if it says landlord may debit, then it should give the option to the landlord. And there should be an option for the landlord to actually click a button and say that, look, I don't want to live it. I can just go on. So that the fact of the matter, what I'm trying to say is, look, only certain aspects, only the should clauses in a smart contract should be fully automated. And the may aspects in a contract or the may clauses in an agreement should actually move to a hybrid model where I can give my consent for a particular action. I can waive off a certain aspect. I could set a different date for that matter. And there is possibility to actually code such elements into the contract as well. For instance, if somebody has not paid me money for last 3 months due to the fact that the COVID crisis has hit and their business has gone bad in the last few months due to the COVID crisis, then I should be given the extension to actually extend that rent period and give it on a deferred basis for over a period of time, right? So that level of hybrid model is what will ideally work in terms of a smart contracts and at places where it's needed. It may be needed in a real estate relationship. It need not be needed in the case of an online marketplace model. For instance, we are buying something from Flipkart, right? The seller has promised that they will deliver the item within 7 days, but they haven't done so. But there is an urgent need for me to get that item. I should have the option to say that, look, give me that item or else just pay the money back because I needed that item by X date. Otherwise, it's not as useful to me if it's delivered after 15 days. But whereas if I don't mind it getting that after 15 days because of the fact that if I place another order in another platform, I will get that after 20 days or blah, 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 then I should have the option to extend it for another 7 days. This function currently is now done by an intermediary like a Flipkart, right? Whereas you should move that option from Flipkart to the user itself. And that's where you will achieve, that's when we will realize the true beauty of what smart contracts through productiles can do, whereby you take the power of that platform and empower each and every person in the ecosystem to actually deal with their commercial relationship in the manner that they deem fit. So this is a slide which describes that, agency is one of the aspects relating to contract, discretion, and the ability to step in. And that's why we need a hybrid model of smart contracts where certain aspects are coded as should and certain aspects are coded as may. And then it should work with the consent artifact model where the consent can work. So this is where I want to talk about DEPA, because DEPA is one of the, it's a data empowerment architecture framework, which which the mighty is adopting along with their consent artifact model, where they're saying that, look, it's possible to add a consent layer to various transactions. So currently the mighty's consultation paper or mighty's working paper on consent artifact, if you look at it, he talks about the use of consent as a way to automate a lot of everyday transactions, even for governance for that matter, even for paper moving between various offices of the government, for commercial transactions, for real estate, for mobility. So it is an endless possibility that we can use if we can add a consent artifact format to it, whereby may clauses can be operated through this consent artifact, whereas should clauses will automatically operate, so that a large part of the friction between the two parties or non-compliances with respect to the contract or the breaches with respect to the contract are taken care of in a manner with protection built in, right? Using escrow where amounts are kept, using other oracles to pull information to determine if an event has happened or not, etc., so that we can build more trust, and that will actually lead to lesser number of disputes. So we need disputes, we actually create an ecosystem where chances of disputes itself are less. And if there is a dispute that arises, then you obviously have an automated forum like a tribunal, like an arbitrator who's sitting there to mediate, or a mediator for that matter, to mediate and resolve the disputes between the parties, and that also gets effected in a manner which is quite automated. For that matter, the other thing typically happens is you have arbitration clauses which says that if a dispute happens, parties will speak. Sometimes that speaking doesn't happen. Then you need to appoint somebody. You can appoint an arbitrator. Then the arbitrator, sometimes the arbitration appointment doesn't happen. The whole process gets delayed to a large extent. So whereas you could even code and decide who are the arbitrators that you want to appoint right from the beginning, and put it behind an encrypted wall so that the other party doesn't see it. And you could just the appointment of arbitrator itself in case there is a dispute. So let's say, like you raise hand on a Zoom call, you can raise your hand and say, look, I have a dispute and this is my arbitrator. And automatically the other party is already appointed an arbitrator per se. He is also immediately appointing an arbitrator, saying because it happens in an automatic manner. So there is no need for somebody to step in. The chances of friction, the chances of disputes are fairly low when we have all these elements automated. The last one that I want to talk about here is Beacon, because this is another protocol which have been out and open, currently been implemented in the Cochin Open Metro network. So essentially, what they're doing is that they're essentially automating, they're platformizing the transport itself, where they're saying instead of an intermediary working and deciding who to get the cabs from and which driver should be allotted to a particular driver, etc., it gives you the ability where cab drivers can be on a protocol, users can use another protocol to communicate with each other, and sometimes even one of the benefits is that you can actually book a whole trip from using a waterway and then moving on to a train or moving on to a metro, and you can have just one end-to-end journey. And the trust is again built into the code, where you say that, look, if you reach X point, right? If you, let's say that you're going from Cubbon Park in Bangalore to Brigade Road, the need for payment will only arise if the customer is dropped off at that particular place, because Oracle is a location, right? So the location sensor in your phone will transmit the fact that, okay, the user has reached there, and that's when the money will automatically move, right? And the user's wallet would have been preloaded for that matter. So which means that he could actually, the money will automatically flow, and there is no way for the user to default and say that, look, I never reached here, because there is a proof. The Oracle is a proof. You've reached at that point of time. But even when you do this, what you need to remember is there needs to be there could be needs for certain level of intermediation, which we will talk about. But just to talk about the use cases that we have in India, right? So one of the aspects is that, look, it's currently one of the biggest problems in India is the fact that ease of doing business is fairly bad. We are 163 out of 190 in terms of enforcing the contract. And the average time to take to enforce contract is 1,445 days, which is, I think, around 4 years, which I am surprised by the number, because I thought it will be more than 8 years from my experience. Because nowadays arbitration is going much faster. We are getting things done in like 2 to 3 years timeline. But after you're done with the arbitration, you need to essentially take this and then enforce this award at somewhere, right? So I think that whole process is very complicated. So if you can, first of all, build more trust and avoid disputes, that's the best possible way. Then let's say if you're moving to disputes itself, let's create code in a manner where even the chances of friction within the process of the dispute resolution is kept to a minimal, and the enforcement is also automatic to a large extent. Let's say that you keep a money deposited, and from that money the amount gets withdrawn as a part of an award, etc., will actually speed a lot of things up. This is the number of pending cases in the current court. 78% of pending cases and 88% in High Court, which are 1 year old, more than 1 year old. So, of course, we also have a very poor judge to population ratio in India, which is also affecting this. So the idea is that we create smart contracts to the extent that we build so much trust that there is no need for a dispute. And if it is, we create mechanisms by which those disputes can be resolved, whether by way of a specialized tribunal or institutional arbitration to take care of specific demands of a particular sector. These are all possible, and our ease of doing business ranking will significantly increase. And as someone who has advised, several clients with respect to commercial matters in India, one of the major issues that people have is actually having India as a jurisdiction because of the fact that they know how terribly slow it is, right? And I also have personal experience of this several times, like, the difficulty in enforcing something in a RERA order or any sort of consumer orders. It's very difficult. So where do we sort of move to? So I think one of the aspects to really consider is looking at institutional frameworks for these sort of intermediation platforms and smart contracts itself. So you need to create smart contracts, but ultimately there would need to be some sort of an arbiter sitting there and deciding if something went wrong in the whole process as well. Because one is, look, we've built the finest of the code in the world. We have made the finest of the agreements in the world, right? And we are looking at combining these two. But ultimately, we haven't done it before, or we're just beginning to understand this, right? So there is a need for an arbiter at some place. So that arbiter could be the state, but as you know, the state is already stretched in terms of capacity. So we can look at models where institutional models, either sponsored by the state or by interested stakeholders coming together. For instance, automation of something which I've been thinking about is actually on e-commerce. I mean, the possibility of companies coming together and creating a protocol and then creating some sort of a governance structure, which could be a governance structure which is not really based on an entity sitting on top, but really based on a trust-based governance system which will involve various stakeholders. For instance, when you look at e-commerce, it should have consumers, it should have e-commerce companies, it should have manufacturers, it should probably have the government as well. So to ensure that this arbitrating body or the governing body is sitting and deciding which code goes into which aspect of the contract goes into the code itself, right? Or should we innovate? And is there a need for innovation of an existing code which is there? And if we innovate, should it apply retrospectively or should it apply prospectively? So essentially, what I'm trying to say is, look, I was speaking about smart contracts to someone, and they told me that, look, if it comes to it, then you lawyers will be jobless because you don't have to write contracts. So I said, no. I mean, we will have to decide, what to get into the code and what not to get into the code, and we will have to also decide how it applies retrospectively or prospectively, or even with respect to even dispute resolution matters. It's just that a lot of friction in daily life, a lot of pace with respect to we can move a lot of in which we can move a lot of things to the code, which can be then implemented, and ease of doing business, ease of regular commercial transactions that you and I do online or offline or in real life could be automated to a large extent is the possibility. So with this, I'm concluding. Thank you very much, Nandi. So I'll request Chitra and Mahesh to join back.
Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I think you gave a good synoptic overview of everything and put it in the simplest of languages that's possible. Anyone could understand. Anyone who is reasonably following would be able to understand what you covered there. We'll open the floor for questions, and Sachin has already asked one. It's a comment come question. The landscape is still uncertain, but doesn't stop us from pulling a group together to do a pilot in some domain. Law plus tech plus domain leaders plus innovators. Should be a question mark.
Of course, I think I'm game for it. So if Sachin's game, Chitra's game, Mahesh's game, I think we should all go for it. I think we should probably adopt something where where the friction is minimal and try and show this as a pilot to the others, right? So I think there's a lot of possibilities here. So I think Beacon itself is an interesting project, but that's a very different sort of a scale. That it'll be difficult to do that. But I think very day-to-day transactions itself, facing the consumer, could be automated to a large extent. And I'm really game. Yeah.
Well, we are always ready. I'm sure Chitra is also ready. Probably we'll have another meeting soon to discuss and take this further.
Yeah, I saw this comment about account aggregators as well from Sachin. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's account aggregators is another one where this is there. But I think account aggregators, the thing is like I said, we need to, of course, look at a hybrid model. And I am actually in favor of hybrid model. I don't know if Mahesh and Chitra, they have another view, but I am not entirely sure of giving up my life to computers. So I need to retain some discretion, because I believe consent is a bedrock for our modern civilization.
I would also favor a hybrid model for another set of reasons too. I think in a previous conversation with Sachin too, I had brought this up. What about facts? Things are easy when facts are are not disputed. But the moment facts are disputed, and you have to decipher facts from what a witness says, or go make an inspection of a place and make an inference on what happened, I don't think that can be coded in. So as long as facts are disputed, and you have to, there is a human judgment involved in whom to trust. I feel that it's impossible to entirely code it. So there has to be some element of humanness left. That's one thing. And secondly, even in the classic law of contracts, I think there is something called discretion that the law recognizes, especially when it comes to the idea of you've not come with clean hands, or it's a lot of remedies are equitable in character, and it is left to human judgment whether equity is to be granted or not. So that's why I think that a hybrid model is inevitable, at least at this juncture. That being said, probably there are many domains where it can be entirely coded, and maybe we should start picking one thing that where probably the whole transaction happens through documents, and the opportunities or avenues for serious disputes and facts are much lesser. Probably that's a place for us to start. Before I go into the next question from the chat box, I had to ask something. Before we try and make this open for all, or try and get anyone to institutionalize it, I think there is an element of public confidence in it. And what needs to be done to make this look like rule of law compliant, make this answering up to due process requirements, and so that the public and let's say the legal judicial system can put confidence into it.
Yeah, so I think the message that should go across to everyone in the ecosystem is the fact that, look, what we are furthering here is actually to further the cause of rule of law, right? So if you want to further the cause of rule of law, we often see this as a function which is attributable to the state, because it's the judiciary is part of it, the lawmaking parliament is part of the state, the executive is part of the state. But when it comes to helping the state administer rule of law better, we citizens also have a huge role in playing, right? So for instance, just look at the sheer number of volume of commercial contract related disputes in India. And then look at the volume of disputes which are not even reaching the courts because of the fact that it is so burdensome to go to the court, right? So what we are doing is we are creating an ecosystem of trust to actually further the cause of rule of law. And we can significantly take the load from the system itself if we create a mechanism like this. To create the trust, the way that I look at it, look, it needs to be, the best way to create trust is actually do a pilot with stakeholders from various stakeholders being involved in the process, coming out with models which are put out for consultation, which are put out for comments. Because honestly, I don't think, I personally haven't met a person who is who knows it all, right? So it needs to be a collaborative effort, taking into account every stakeholder involved in the process, even the consumers. If you look at a case like a real estate, the builders, the landowners, the companies which are doing the maintenance of it, in fact, the banks and financial institutions involved in it. Unfortunately, that's not the way typically people have approached smart contracts, or for that matter, any sort of such regulatory RegTech innovations. It's often, very top to down approach that happens. So we need to take an approach where we are consultative and ensure that we implement good feedback and ensure that we try and cover all aspects of the process itself. So I think that's, to answer Himali's question as well. I think one of the important aspects to think of is the fact that we need to, bias is, to my mind, unavoidable, right? Because it's very difficult to even identify the bias, right? So because of the fact that I am somebody who does technology law, I already have a bias that smart contracts are not going to work. But I had to break that bias out and say that, look, I prefer a hybrid model because I also believe in consent and agency, right? So I think the point is, different sort of feedback should be adopted, put in together, and it really is up to those who are pioneering it, those who are can evangelize this as a form in which protocols can be managed in a much better manner, and also the governance structure. I think this trust and governance structure is actually very, very It's just look at any of the intermediation market right now. So what happened in the tech intermediation market right now was that people started losing trust in the intermediates, right? Cab drivers had a problem with cab aggregator companies. The customers had a problem with search pricing. The city officials had a problem with non-compliance with metered fares with respect to cab drivers. This is just an example. So similar sort of examples can be found in any sort of intermediation, any sort of platform intermediation model, because there is so much power and network effect that player itself brings to the ecosystem. If you look at the payment model itself, for instance, we have another good intermediary we have is NPCI, which has done a great job of democratizing payment over the years. But there is a lot of discontent among the players with respect to the fact that it is also exercising a lot of power because it also has created a network itself. So we need to move away from such network-based intermediary models to actually a protocol-based trust-shared model, which are actually built upon governance structures involving various stakeholders, instead of focusing on saying that, look, I am the tech company, so I'll just sit on top of you and ensure that everyone follows the rules, right? And you're granting a lot of power to that entity, which is not otherwise accountable to people other than the fact that it's a commercial entity. It's only accountable to its shareholders for that matter, right? So I think we need to come up with that sort of governance models, take a consultative approach. I wouldn't say eradicate bias, but try and eliminate bias to the extent possible. And then I think by that way we can build trust.
Ecosystem of trust. That's the comment that
exactly. So I think what Sachin is saying, I think is sort of hit the nail. So in the sense that, look, I think ecosystem of trust and trust by code is the aspect, right? So minimize the ability of a party to move away from the trust ecosystem and minimize the possibilities of the stakeholders to distrust each other, right? So like I said, if every time I rent my flat out, I have worry about the fact that, look, will I get paid rent every month? But if it's an automated process itself, and if there is an escrow of the security deposit kept elsewhere, it actually is a much better system to follow, right? Because it will come to me automatically. It doesn't really matter, right? And let's say that I have oracles in the apartment that I rent out, where sensors are able to even detect a lot of these points with respect to the safety and the security of my furniture that I put in my apartment will be taken care of. So there is we are eliminating the possibility of distrust right now. We actually do this model in if you look at our daily transactions in a very different form. For instance, credit cards actually became a way in which trust can be built for hotel bookings, right? I mean, when you go to a hotel, you give your credit card, they'll give you a charge because of the fact that that's the trust that we have. I mean, there's no other relationship other than the fact that I gave the credit card. So if I burn down my bed at night, so he can deduct the money from there. That's a trust in which he is doing business. But there is no reverse trust for me, right? When I go there is no possibility that I'll be sure. I mean, I'm not sure of the fact that I will actually get a room. I need to trust a brand. I'll trust probably a Taj hotel over certain other chain hotels because of the fact that I know that Taj may not behave like that. I'm trusting more on the brand. There is no other trust ecosystem to actually guarantee me that. Even right now, Booking.com doesn't guarantee me that. There is a possibility that if I go there and something happens, I'm shown the door and say that, look, I'm sorry, but this has happened. So we can, in every sort of these commercial transactions, there is ability to build trust. And when there is more trust, the chances of dispute are less. And let's even look at situations where a dispute process can be coded into. We can even reduce the friction when it comes to these aspects per se. So that you don't have to necessarily worry about, someone going and starting a parallel proceeding when you've already coded what needs to be done in case a dispute arises.
Right.
So Sachin, I mean, Sachin, happy if you could unmute and join, but I see your comment that you're unable to.
We will surely have another round of conversation with Sachin too. I think there's more interesting topics coming up. There's a hand up, Milind. I'll just allow you to speak, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Evening, sir. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
So I actually have two questions, but before that, I just want to thank Nikhil sir for the hybrid model. That is something that I gained something new to learn. So I have basically two questions. First is, we know basically that, Bitcoin is not really environmentally sustainable. That's what the proponents who criticize cryptos say. So do you think when smart contracts will be more popular in relative sense, we'll be able to make it scalable enough while being sustainable? And my second question is the impact of COVID-19. So one side argues that that technology has been evolved such that a lot of people are being taking initiatives to stand up for what is innovative. But don't you think that the economy has been impacted so much that any technological revolution, including smart contracts, have been shifted far?
So I didn't get the second question. Can you come again on that?
Yeah, sure. So what I mean is, because of COVID-19, we basically have two impacts. First one is the general society has moved to more technological things. Like this meeting itself, we are talking on Zoom instead of or physical meeting.
Have a
So
choice, right? I'd like to meet you in person, unfortunately, but yeah.
sure, I would love to too as well. So first thing is that, but the other thing is because of COVID-19, economy of the globe is affected so much that we cannot really revolutionize things that we do because we don't really have money for that. So do you think that people will be able to, in real sense, the governments will be able to take initiatives to move things that are more technologically advanced, including smart contracts?
Yeah, so
So
I think on the Bitcoin point, look, I'm not advocating the use of Bitcoins per se, if that's what you meant. And I generally think that, look, more than Bitcoins, I think the current capitalism is actually non-environmentally friendly, right? The way in which our production and consumption works is not environmentally friendly. So I think that's a much larger problem than Bitcoin, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. Second one is, look, smart contracts have nothing to do with Bitcoins, right? Um, the underlying technology of the Bitcoins, which is a blockchain technology, could be used for smart contracts. That's, due to the nature of distributed ledgers and due to the architecture of distributed ledgers, it's possible to give users much more control. But even without distributed ledger technology, it is possible, and we have seen models such as that being implemented using protocols, right? So I don't see that being very related. And to come on to your second question, look, I think this is an opportunity because the pandemic has hit us. It's been over 1.5 years, and we are all trying to do whatever we can to lead a normal life in the circumstances. And look, if you just look at it, the wealth creation in the world hasn't stopped. It's that machine is still running. So there's a lot of capital out there, but that capital is actually stuck at places. That's why you see, the number of billionaires in the world growing because of the fact that the capital is getting stuck without being distributed. So in that sense, I think there are newer models of governance and there are newer models to approach capital itself that we will see in the coming few years, and that will of course ensure that uh, there are ways to spend. Right. For instance, just look at what typically happens when the economy comes to a standstill and there is sort of depression trends in the market. The government will spend money, right? But I would say that the government needs to spend money on rule of law, because if the government wants to grow the economy in a country and really grow to be a $5 trillion economy or whatever that number is, that whatever time period that we have, it's very important that a person who does a commercial transaction, or for that matter any transaction, even if it's a day-to-day commercial transaction, needs to be protected by the law itself. That's the sort of protection that advanced countries give across the globe, right? If I buy a property in US, I'm guaranteed that there is a system to ensure that property comes to me. I mean, there could be other problems wrong with the way US market is, but there is a rule of law protection for me per se from the system. That is unfortunately lacking in India. And to my mind, that's an infrastructure that needs investment in. And it is rule of law infrastructure, which involves parallel alternate dispute resolution mechanisms, which involves use of smart contracts and hybrid models, which promote rule of law and enforcement of a contract. That will build investor confidence. That will build trust in our daily life. that will also bring more capital to the country. The capital which is stuck in the hands of few billionaires will actually start circulating in the market. And once that circulation happens, is when everyone will economically develop. That's a model in which market economy works, right? So to my mind, if you give the confidence to a person that look, if you put your money in on a new project, your capital is adequately protected. Not from the risk of the market and other aspects. That's a risk appetite call that he needs to take. But if the other party acts funny, the courts or the rule of law will ensure that you are adequately protected and you'll be given a fair hearing and you'll be given an opportunity where the other party cannot just run away from enforcing the contract, etc., etc. That is a part of confidence building measures that we can do as part of economy. And honestly, this is something that we haven't done at all in the last 30 years. I mean, we have talked about liberalization and globalization and privatization, but or rule of law building, investment in rule of law infrastructure has severely been lacking. And especially in the last 10 years or so, when it comes to, whether it comes to judicial appointments or more courts and things like that. And that's where we need to focus. And when the state hasn't done that, it gives us the opportunity to actually forward a new model and say that, look, with the backing of the state, with the state not opposing it, we are going to try out something new. And that will further the cause of rule of law.
I absolutely agree with you, sir, that if credibility is there and incentives are given to the companies, there would be a significant change. So thank you for your comments. I'll mute myself and thank you.
And I think Sachin is just a ping saying that, look, we could look at blockchain run on carbon neutral consensus mechanism. Yes, of course, that's a great alternative and suggestion. Though I know Mahesh will probably can speak more about that. And here's his own views on it.
Not entirely, really. And the bigger question, what are these carbon neutral consensus mechanisms? I mean, what does it actually solve is a good question to ask. Personally,
ecosystem for which
I'm not a great fan of these ideas of shifting it somewhere else. You either address the big elephant in the room and deal with it or not. And you don't really achieve anything by moving stuff from one part of the world to the other part, because this is global warming that we're talking about. So that's really not going to achieve as much, as my opinion. Well, I'm not a scientist, so I can't really speak. But coming back to our topic, Nikhil, when you drew the example of, say, 4 sensors, for example, that can make sure that your furniture is safe. This was also an earlier conversation that I was having with Sachin some other time. So there is this idea that probably the Department of Facts won't be a huge problem in future, because facts would be recorded somewhere and it's just a matter of accessing it. Are we not then building a surveillance state?
So, I mean, of course, look, there is a possibility to misuse everything, right? I mean, it really depends on which government enforces or implements something. So there is a possibility that all these mechanisms that we are talking about, more digitization will actually lead to more surveillance, right? So it's an unfortunate part living in this country, because, you look at the benefits of something like Aadhaar and it's easily get offset because of the surveillance possibilities using something like Aadhaar. The same will apply for smart contracts as well, for sure. Look, I think that's a fundamental discussion that needs to be had with respect to the power that we hold as citizens, right? So currently in this country, and pretty much this is true across the globe for that matter, but India will probably, fare the worst in the list for that matter. We are probably the most powerless. Citizens in India are the most powerless. Government or the executive is the most powerful. Maybe judiciary is probably the second most powerful. Parliament is extremely weakened. The corporates are relatively empowered, whereas the ordinary citizens we are at a situation where there's a huge asymmetry of power due to the amount of data that the government and other players in this ecosystem have over us. So that's a fundamental point, which is a related point, because on one hand, we are talking about using of data, using of more digital technologies for improving rule of law, improving quality of life, improving access to justice, various other things. It could literally go against us if we don't reform the norms with respect to data usage, which to a large extent will be done by PDP bill. But again, it's losing its teeth when it comes to aspects relating to government surveillance or government enforced data uses. So we need to really empower that. There's no two ways about it. And look, I think if you look at the models like what China has done, right? I mean, their models are also very trust-based models where the state is actually in control. It'll work in an authoritative regime like China, but in India, it'll actually cause a lot of trouble, and it'll ultimately affect the way in which democracy will be administered in this country. And it definitely is something that we need to debate a lot about. But that shouldn't stop us from implementing and coming out with a governance model for a smart contract. The way I look at it, because the kind of stakeholders involved, we are not here to use our data and surveil anyone. So we can create governance mechanism which will work, which could be used as a model and the standard for others to follow to start with.
May I, if there are no other questions?
Please.
So just a few sort of thoughts. When we look at the goals of or the opportunities of smart contracts and sort of pit it against the kind of goals that we're looking at in terms of or the problems we see in terms of courts not being able to resolve disputes, and on that, the reason why World Bank says it's only 1,000 odd days is because they only look at Delhi and Bombay information. They don't look beyond. So that's the reason why it's not, doesn't sort of sync with our experiences in the rest of the country. So once you pick the goals as, I want to help create an alternative to the judicial system, I think, I think it sort of then messes with a lot of, what this ecosystem is likely or should be or should address. I think this makes sense for certain sectors to start with. It makes sense for certain categories of sort of transactors to start with, because our sort of inequalities in our country, the disempowerment, I think all that, so with all that in mind, this can't be a goal akin to the justice system or, helping out the justice system. I think we'd be sort of pushing too much onto the agenda if we were to make that comparison or that objective. The second is, I also see, though, I'm deeply interested from what you've said so far and the kind of balance you've brought to this conversation. I think this shall that you talk about in the hybrid system, at a starting point, I don't know if it is immutable at all, right? So as decision points, I think what one needs to see is probably an optional mechanism that's available and limited to certain sectors. We, for instance, with the urge to sort of build our ease of ranking, ease of doing business rankings, there are changes we're bringing to the law, and I think Sri Yashodhardhan's here, and he'll hopefully bear me out on this. For instance, in our Specific Relief Act, there is an amendment saying that if there is a breach of contract, one party can get it performed by substitution by another party. Now, there is one party who is taking a decision that there is a breach, right? And there is a dispute around it. But, are we avoiding that dispute or sort of, emasculating that dispute by saying, you take a decision and you move on? These are sort of some of the issues and sort of concerns that I have with smart contracts, but very happy to, together with Mahesh and Sachin and others, to carry this conversation forward.
So I think this is also related to this is where I think it gets very interesting, right? I think, all of our contractual relationships are not binaries, right? So this is where I said, look, when the concept of smart contracts started being discussed in the tech world itself, typically my friends who are engineers have a tendency to look at it in binaries because they are taught to also think from the perspective of zeros and ones, right? There's a logic, there's a yes or a no. But for us lawyers, we understand grace really well, and we understand perspectives really well. And I think that's where I think the need for sometimes these oracles, and again, the fact that the Mahesh said about the Ministry of the Facts, right? So, there are facts, but there are measurable facts, right? So the smart contract can only work on the basis of these measurable facts. And we determine that the measurable fact and the oracle where it comes from is actually some sort of an immutable record of something. For instance, let's assume that when it comes to, let's say, performance of, let's look at something like an artwork. I'm creating an artwork for you. If I like the artwork, I'll purchase it from you. You cannot really encode the fact that, look, how do I determine whether you like the artwork or not? It is not possible, right? So it's basically based on a hybrid model where I say that, okay, I like the artwork. Yes, I will buy it, right? So that's where I think the hybrid model comes in. And we cannot base the smart contracts, and it will only restrict its application to aspects which are measurable and can be recorded, for which a immutable record is actually present. And the sectors that we can actually foray into will actually be limited to that. Like, for instance, is the construction of a building ready, which is inspected by an authority at the possession letter given, right? By the authority after inspection. That could be the only trigger point. After they build the apartment itself, there could be issues with respect to, let's say, slabs on the floor, right? I may see that it's cracked, but the builder may say that it's just a scratch. Those sort of models cannot really be encoded into a smart contract itself. I think that's where the precise problem that arises. But what we have seen, or what I have seen from my experience, is that a large volumes per se can be taken out of these sort of issues coming up, because a lot of issues are discretion-based issues, which will continue to happen. A lot of issues can be recorded, and they can be analyzed and measured, and then a decision can be formatted. So I think, to my mind, only those aspects can be automated by way of a smart contract, or even by way of a hybrid smart contract for that matter. Wherever there is a lot of human discretion possible, the essential function of a smart contract will reduce. And we'll have to accept that it will reduce, because, I don't think we have all signed up to, our lives to, computers. Not yet. So I'm not sure what my daughters will say when they grow up, but it'll be interesting to hear them. But I don't think we are ready for it yet. And I won't be ready to give up that freedom yet. So I agree with you, Chitra. And I think we need to also, I know that when I made this statement, I made it sounded grander than it was probably, but I believe that at least a large chunk of these transactions and litigations can be avoided, and of course we will retain some so that we can also make a living. You're on mute, Mahesh.
I would look at it in a slightly different way too. I think a lot of people don't raise disputes because it's not worth it. The cost of litigating or the time involved in it. There are a lot of claims that people routinely give up because it's just thought of as too much of hassle. Maybe this can help kind of improve that, especially I think in the consumer realm. A lot of things in the supply chain related things getting delivered on time. So where there aren't seriously disputed facts, where like you said, whether is that a crack or is that a scratch kind of questions, but whether it got delivered or not delivered, I think those kind of things can definitely happily go up here and improve consumer rights and
exactly. So consumer areas where consumer rights is where this can be implemented to a large extent. And I'm as we speak, look, my personal friend, there are two disputes which are ongoing right now. One, I bought a smart desktop from an agent in Bombay who took the money for a smart desk with some, a coffee warmer and Bluetooth and all that, and that's not delivered yet after some 6-7 months. And I'm thinking of the pain of going to Consumer Forum in Mumbai, and it's painful. So I yet haven't taken a decision. Another is with respect to a flat that my sister bought. We got a RERA order, but because of the extension, it's just been going on, and the flat is not delivered, no penalties paid, and EMA is being paid out to the bank by her for over a year and a half. And to my mind, a few things like this, I think smart contracts can help in a long way. And the other thing that I'm thinking smart contracts can immediately help is actually in the data ecosystem, right? So for instance, the way we look at data sometimes is it's actually based on a contract as well. So we don't often see it as a contract, but when I'm giving my data to Facebook, it's for a particular services, and Facebook can deny particular services because of the fact that I cannot give that data back. So there are bound to be large number of disputes even in the personal data protection framework that will come up once the bill is passed. A large part of it can be automated, and in fact, that's what the government is also thinking along the lines of consent manager, the ability to port and ability to move data, revoke consent, and blah blah blah. But we can add that layer to the commercial layer as well. And I think these are a few areas where it's possible, and it's also sometimes little stupid to think that, look, when I'm buying something online, when I'm transacting online for any sort of commercial transaction, then I'll have to go to a court where I need to be physically present. I enjoy the convenience of actually doing the transaction of it online with few seconds and few minutes. But to take a dispute, I'll have to go to a physical court and run around it for like 2 years period of time to get a remedy. Itself is disproportionate, right? I mean, so just look at the cost, the risk of litigation itself on a matter like that. It actually outweighs sometimes the benefit that I get with respect to doing a transaction online. So I think there is that risk benefit. There is a serious serious mismatch between the risk benefits there. So I think that's a possibility. A lot of it can be e-commerce is one area where I believe that smart contracts can do a lot of function with respect to, like you said, Mahesh. I mean, simple delivery and is it delivered? Yes or no? Is it working? Because let's say if it's a connected product itself, you'll be able to determine. For instance, let's say there is an Oracle, which could be an Oracle, a third-party trusted party, which says that, look, can scan a computer and say that, look, everything especially with the computer which is delivered or a phone which is delivered is working up perfectly, including sound and camera and video and functioning, etc. That itself is a good certificate which can be uploaded. And if it's not working well, then I think a refund mechanism is initiated.
Sneha has asked a question, but I think you've sort of already answered it. She's asking whether the decision itself can be made part of the smart contracts. But I think our kind of chat earlier was about the limitations of that. So maybe.
Yeah, so I think, so Sneha, I'm not sure how much we could determine that, because I think what we are doing is we cannot fully replace a judicial discretion for that matter. To a large extent, we can code outcomes. We can even agree the basis for which deciding an outcome. But there's a limit to it, in my opinion, because I think it will otherwise impact the way in which our judicial system have been running for forever. But I think, again, if it's measurable, it's possible to some extent. But to code the final decision itself, I think will be a bit too much, at least to start with. So we'll have to see where it goes, because we'll have to really pilot and see how this can move to the next level.
I guess there are no more questions, and we've almost ran out of time too. There's 5 minutes left.
I think is a question from Milind on integrating.
Sneha has another question. Should we not integrate an on-chain dispute resolution mechanism where the decision itself can be made part of the smart contract? And that's what we asked. I think Milind is asked about, it's on something else, on AI and use of blockchain in the judiciary. We will be having another conversation around that. Probably you could be a part of that if you could shoot that question there. Well, it's 4 minutes left. I think
Milind has raised his hand.
Yes, Milind, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Just a different question on the consent thing, because we are specifically talking about hybrid thing and we are seeing it very optimistically. So I just have an example, and maybe you can sort of solve it for me to have better clarity. So suppose if I decide to buy a second-hand car and we have that hybrid model sort of contract where I basically give my consent that yes, it's fine. But when I go there, I see it's actually there's a big dent on the car, but the seller says that it's just a minor crack or scratch. So don't you think suppose the seller is right, I'm just making nonsense claims over there, so don't you think a consent thing also makes the system very inefficient, as in I can have a sort of forum shopping kind of thing, I just reach out to a lot of sellers, and then I sort of make my decision, and the sellers are on a poor footing because they can't really do anything if I have the final say in terms of the consent that yes, I want to buy this.
So you're saying you're selling a car with a dent, or is that, or you're buying a car with a dent? What is
I'm buying a car with a dent, but it's not actually a dent, it's just a minor scratch, but I'm claiming that it's a dent and I can't buy
I
it.
think that's where we need an arbiter, right? So the point is that, look, one is when we are looking at such models, we shouldn't presuppose, malafide intent, because we are talking about building trust ecosystem, right? So we shouldn't start with a point of distrust itself, is my opinion. We should factor in the possibilities of distrust. There's no doubt about it. But when we build a trust-based ecosystem, we need to believe that, look, there is actually trust in the ecosystem, and we need to find ways to utilize that trust in a positive way. So for sure, I mean, there could be people who misuse the system. To believe that the sellers will actually be disadvantaged due to that, I find it a little difficult, because I think unless you have a lot of time in your hand, you wouldn't actually venture into just buying a car, getting it delivered, and then returning it back. Right? I'm sure there could be people who misuse the system, but there could be governance ways to solve this issue as well. Like, for instance, very simple, right? I mean, so if you see a repeated behavior, then by protocol itself can eliminate you from the system. And if you want to appeal to it, you go to an arbiter and say that, look, I need to be let back into the system because I didn't do anything wrong. That's where I said that, look, there needs to be a minimal level of intermediation as well. So intermediation completely taking away is not possible, but intermediation by governance structure where there is a balance of power per se, with various stakeholders involved in the ecosystem, that should take care of it. So, of course, we cannot code for the edge case in all possibilities, but it's possible to take care of at least some extent and ensure that the bad actors are not rewarded in the system. It's also possible to do that by way of code and policies.
Fair enough, sir. Fair enough. I also think that just when we have sort of experience with these kind of systems, we can build up on those to have more trustable platform. So thank you.
If there are no more questions, then I think I'll wind up the session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikhil, for taking the time out. It was a very enjoyable session. And I'm sure the conversation doesn't end here. We'll try and take the lead for getting you and all of us around the table sometime for taking this further. And we will have more sessions on tech and disputes. We probably another one coming up soon on AI and dispute resolution. Hope to see you all there and help us take this conversation forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.